Hello everybody, I'm AJ Cerna. I am a fantasy author, and today I'm here to talk about books that changed my life. And I guess there's many different ways that can come across. Are they books that are just so amazing, or are they books that just came at a really influential time? Really, it's all of the above, any and all of the above. But specifically, I'll talk about just a few books that have really changed my life in one way or another and why. I guess to start with, maybe one of the earlier books that has changed my life in some way was James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. This is a book that my dad actually read to me and my sister. Must have been early to mid 90s, so a while ago. Significantly before the, I guess, live action / animated movie came out. And I think it was really influential. First of all, it ignited my imagination. It was very fun, very beautifully written, but it was probably the first story that I can recall where I literally basically wrote fan fiction for it. When I was little, and I wrote this story about a boy and other bug-like creatures. I say a story, that's being very generous. It was just, I guess, things happening. I don't even remember specifically what had happened with it, but I think at one point they crashed a train. Don't ask why, made no sense. I was probably 7 or 8, but I remember specifically typing it in Windows, probably 95 at the time. It may have been, I think it was 95. So maybe it was closer to 95 where that happened, or 94, because I also learned for the first time what the little squiggly lines underneath misspelled words meant, because I don't think that was a feature prior to that, and it was very weird. I thought I had broken the computer. But I also think it was influential because it was the first adaptation that I saw that I had read the book first, and like actual full-on book. And I learned the woes that come along with expecting something out of an adaptation where things aren't quite like you want them to be, and learning to cope with that. Like, for example, the rhinoceros at the beginning of the story that gobbles up James's parents, it kind of represented as a cloud. And I remember back then, I think the cloud, thinking back at the movie right now, it represented the idea. But to me, I was just like, why is the rhinoceros a cloud? Why aren't we seeing this? I was really confused by the whole thing. And in the 90s, when you had an adaptation, you basically just accepted it really wasn't going to resemble the book a whole lot. Take a lot of liberties with it. So I guess twofold is how it really influenced me. I don't think I fully appreciated what really a fantasy story can do for me, until I moved on to the next book in my series, or I guess this video, and that is Redwall by Brian Jacques. And Redwall series is a long-running series, or it was a long-running series, about mice and other woodland-type creatures. Essentially high fantasy, except utilizing those types of creatures. More specifically, the main ones, at least in the series, were mice. And it was a typical hero's journey story. It was about this evil mouse named Clooney, who was essentially going to invade Redwall, and the preparation required from, what was the name of the main character? I don't even remember at this point, but it was essentially his hero's journey to become the hero that Redwall needs. And so it was the first, I think this may have been the first series that I read, and I really understood as far as interconnected stories, not necessarily connected directly, but different generations and different ancestries in the past and stuff, and all of it having a history that we can trace through the various different books. It was also, each book was like a puzzle. It had at least the ones that I read, had very kind of similar structures. You had a mystery angle, you had a puzzle aspect to it, a lot of depth. I recall the violence in that being very surprising at the time. And I'm trying to remember I think this may have been Martin the Warrior, where there were these two characters. Martin the Warrior is one of the books, by the way. These two characters who were bad guys, but you were starting to like them as good guys. And then they inadvertently killed one of like the main secondary characters by accident. And That was kind of depressing at the time. So a lot of moral grays. I'm not even sure if I would look back on them as moral grays nowadays, but a lot of moral grays for me back then. Interesting storytelling. It was probably the first series that I also burned myself out on. I think I read 5 or 6 of those books back then, and then dropped a series altogether. But as happens, I also, once again, wrote a complete rip-off story, and I don't remember what it was called or what happened. Wait, no, it's coming to me actually right now. There was a mysterious, wheezing villain character that tried to kill one of the main characters. I don't know why they didn't do it when they had a chance, but I remember something about that. Very influenced by Redwall. Like many writers, it's just influenced by what you've read, which is something that I feel like is not encouraged enough by enough people. Is yes, fan fiction can be looked on as sort of this negative thing, and I can't really say that I've ever really been officially a part of a fan fiction community in any way, shape, or form, but that's how writers practice. They use things that they like, they test out ideas. A lot of them don't work, but that's okay. Eventually you'll get to the point where you'll get better. And back then I just tried out. I'm sure there's a bunch of lost word documents from tons of different stories that I've tried, but Redwall was certainly a huge influence in that regard. The next book I want to talk about is The Golden Compass, or His Dark Materials, the entire His Dark Materials trilogy by Philip Pullman. Now, I think this is where my obsession with writing went to a whole different level. And I really started to look deeper into the different stories, different themes. This is probably the first book series I was truly obsessed with on a deeper level. Specifically, I bought lots of different ancillary type of literature, essays on it, what the meaning is, the deeper contextual levels, the religious aspect to it. It is a middle grade-ish series, middle grade to YA to adult series. It's all over the bookstore. If you haven't heard of it, that book is filed everywhere at the bookstore. It transcends age in many different ways. On one level, it is a standard sort of middle grade story about a girl who goes off on an adventure in search of a friend. And then it gets darker. But on another level, it's about organized religion being terrible. And then on a deeper level from that, as you get further into it, it's about actual religion being terrible. About actual religion being nothing more than just ascended beings that are asserting power over another group. And it's a whole thing. There's so much ink that has been written or spilled on this whole story. You have a film adaptation that flopped in 2007, I think it was. And then, of course, you have the HBO series, His Dark Materials, that ended, I think, last year. I actually never finished that. I need to check that out again. But largely influential just because of it showed me what literature could be. Of course, growing up, you're always taught, oh yeah, literature is important. Stories are important. But it was a whole other thing to be told that, and another to discover that route on your own. And not only to see it in things that are deemed quote-unquote important, but in stories that are just fun to read on a surface level, having that deeper meaning. But I think discovery is a huge part of it, and being able to discover that on your own, it makes you feel pretty powerful. At least it made me feel pretty powerful as I was figuring out all of these things and the different ways in which the written word can affect. So yeah, The Golden Compass and His Dark Materials. That is number 3. And lastly, number 4, I'm going to talk about a manga, One Piece. One Piece. What can I say about One Piece that hasn't been said already? I've been reading since around 2003 or 2004. I don't remember specifically. It was in an issue of Shonen Jump magazine, the English edition, back when it was in print form. I picked up a couple copies of that. For those who have read the story, I was right at the end of the Buggy arc, right after Luffy had defeated Buggy. And I picked it up from there. My friend of mine, when I got my teeth pulled, some wisdom teeth in the back, he got me a couple of volumes to read while I was laid up in bed, and oh my goodness, those volumes are very cemented into my brain. And I got the editions before they changed Zoro's name to Zolo in the Viz Media copies. I used to have them. I let someone borrow them, and I never got them back. Still bitter about that. Regardless, it is a deeply influential story to me. I think it really showed storytelling, how epic it can truly be. Of course, I've read other things. I had read Lord of the Rings. I had read the Terry Brooks series, Sword of Shannara. I had read so many other stories that are quote-unquote epic, but I think up until that point, I hadn't read anything that was quote-unquote fantasy in manga form, or the same kind of high fantasy in manga form that had that epic scope in a different way. And it was a series, One Piece is a series that I really liked at a heart level early on. But it just snowballed into something bigger as we got into it, as we got deeper, of course, from the East Blue Saga into the Baroque Work Saga, seeing the what I call the reverse bottleneck with a story like this, and then it really opens up into something much bigger between all the different agents that make up Baroque works, and the interconnected aspect with the world government and the Warlord of the Sea, Crocodile and all that. It really displayed a world that exists separate from the main characters and made it feel really lived in a way that I hadn't seen in manga before. Because up until that point, a lot of manga I've read really revolved around the main characters to the point where it almost felt like everything revolved around the main character. Like, it just felt that way. Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, I love those stories, but Goku and Co. are like the most important things ever. Yes, stuff happens outside of it, but they affect everything. And while Luffy and everyone in One Piece affect everything, they are still a cog in a much bigger machine. And it's very rewarding to see how they fit into everything. And it's a story that continues to be really amazing. It's a story that affected my earlier publications when I published under a different pen name back in the day, in the Western that I had written, the one that I plan on revisiting and republishing at some point. But at that point, I think I was too ambitious for my own good at that point. Someday I'll get back to it. Regardless, it's been incredibly rewarding to see One Piece really continue to rise over the past couple of decades from something that literally was just me by myself. I was the only person I knew who read One Piece. I had a friend who knew what One Piece was, but he read Bleach instead. I knew other people, they read Naruto instead, or they watched the Naruto anime. So it's nice to see now that all these years, these 15 to 20 years later, other people are really starting to experience it for the first time. And seeing the excitement that comes with it. I think that's it for now. Those are 4 books, book series, books quote unquote, that have affected me greatly over the course of my life. But what about you? What are some books that have affected you? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.